said, well, we have this vision for learning. I said, oh, well, wait, you're the technology people. What are you talking about learning? So that is this conversation. That is the conversation we want to have. But the challenge is that we're not there. And we're not ready to walk away from explicit conversations about the role of technology, about technology leadership, support, about adequate national infrastructure and devices. So I think as we are moving to these new models, we cannot lose sight of where we are, continue to make those investments, continue to bring people from where they are to where they need to be, and not just presume if we blow up the system that we're ready to go there without that kind of support. So with that, I will turn it over.
Thank you, Dad. So I want to go to Ken Kay to get the perspective of business and industry, and Ken has been working on public-private partnerships, particularly related to policy, like most of your career, and does a brilliant job of it. I think one of the things that I heard in a lot of the conversations today in the tables was, boy, I'm at Microsoft, I'm at Promethean, I'm at Intel, I'm at Dell. I don't know how to engage in this. I really want to do something, but I just don't know how to engage. And so I'm hopeful that, Ken, you can help give us some perspective of it as business and industry. How do you engage in this?
Thank you, Karen. First, I want to reiterate the thanks that you expressed to both Paul and Tom for convening this meeting. I've been interested in the College of Education issue for over a decade, and during the course of that, most of the people I've talked to about this work have told me to work on something else. And it's been described repeatedly as a black hole, and you ought to do something else with your time, like root for the Redskins when they're 3-9. But I'm really appreciative of this because of your perseverance, both of you, and the fact that you've collected just a stellar group of people to work on it at the right time. So I think it's critical, and it's related to a couple of points I want to make. So I just wanted to express appreciation to both of you. We haven't had a lot of comments about the precise business role, at least today. I wasn't here yesterday. The one comment I heard this morning that completely resonated with me was somebody who was over here that said, business has got to be at the table and stay engaged. And so I agree with that, but I want to talk about what that needs to look like. The business community, I think, has made some mistakes in terms of what it is that they focus on, what it is they don't focus on. So his comment was, the business community is in a position to talk about what the outcomes for students need to be. The business community is in a position to talk about what are the design specs. And we've done that within the context of the Partnership for 21st Century Skills broadly, but any business engaging with a College of Ed ought to be sitting down with them and saying, these are the kinds of students we need, these are the outcomes we need beyond the content mastery. So I think there's a huge role for the business community to play in articulating the design specs for education, and it's a core competence of theirs. So it's not off message. The second thing is that the business community has been completely deficient. If you think about what it's really spent its time on, it's spent its time sometimes on standards, most of the time on accountability. It hasn't said a word about professional development. Not one word that I'm aware of in general. And it can't stand, because whether it's pre-service, in-service, the business community knows better than anybody that it's investing billions of dollars in training of its own workforce. The educators don't have credibility on that issue. I need more professional development hours. It sounds like they want a vacation. So my point, though, is the business community can stand up and say, we don't have a 21st century workforce without investments in that workforce. How can we expect teachers to be 21st century workers if we're not investing in them in the ways they need to teach and assess? So I think it's really important that the business community dramatically increase the amount of time it spends on professional development. Another thing the business community can do, we've sort of talked about this, some people have hinted about the fact that there are deans in the room, but there aren't chancellors and presidents in the room, right? The business community talks to chancellors and presidents. And I think there's an opportunity for the business community to say this cannot just be a College of Education conversation. If the chancellors and presidents don't pay attention, this isn't going to happen. Now, the last thing is I'm glad, Doug, you set me up, and then I'm going to tell an analogy. You set me up beautifully for this issue of, can we expect business to make investments in this area? And the answer is, depends on how you do it. Having described or used the term black hole, the business community is not going to invest in a black hole. So if they see this as an area that's not going anywhere, they're not going to invest. So the importance of this conference, I think, the challenge to this conference is, can you give people a vision that you actually have a roadmap of where you want to go? If you left here with a vision, and I don't know, is Susan Petros still here or not? The AACTE and some of the companies in the room and Partnership for 21st Century Skills are also working on a vision to try to articulate what 21st century education and colleges of education should look like, that we're bringing as a draft to the AACTE conference in Atlanta. But here's my point. If we have visions that are compelling, you actually have a leg to stand on in terms of saying to business, this isn't going to be an investment going nowhere. This is actually going to be tied to a plan that actually has very specific outcomes in mind. And then finally, obviously, you can get business potentially to invest its time, its people, its products, in-kind contributions, but only if they're convinced that it's part of an improvement strategy that's going to take hold. So I want to offer an analogy in this regard, because I think we think that we're doing this for the first time. And I go back 25 years in my sort of commitment to U.S. competitiveness issues. And I recall when I started working on those issues, we were all concerned about the Japanese at the time. That was 1984, right? So it was all about the Japanese threat. Well, somebody woke up one day and said, hey, one of the pieces of the puzzle we're not focused on are the business schools, right? Deming is a hero in Japan. We're not teaching Deming in the United States. We're not teaching just-in-time manufacturing in the United States. We're not teaching TQM in the United States. The Business Higher Ed Forum at that time, some of you know the group, did a blueprint for a globally competitive MBA program. What does that mean? A globally competitive MBA program. We have to teach state-of-the-art business practices in this country. We're actually training a generation of new business leaders on 20, 30, 40-year-old practices. So I think that one of the reasons I'm hopeful, one of the reasons I sort of feel like Tom and Paul does, that there's work, useful work to be done here, is could we challenge ourselves? And I don't think anybody yet, today at least, has used the term, what is a globally competitive college of education? What is a globally competitive college of education? I think that if we were able, and I think a lot of the recommendations that we've made today, the things we've talked about, put us on a track to get there. But if you went to the business community and said, we now actually have a sense that we can create globally competitive colleges of education. And oh, by the way, when we did this with business schools in the mid and late 1980s, we succeeded. We actually did turn around programs, and the point was that business leaders, foundations, tied their investments to MBA programs to that blueprint and said, you want the money? You're going to make these changes. And so what I'm saying here is that if we come out in the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months with something compelling that says we have a vision, that this is real, and that we then, and by the way, it's painful because you're going to be holding your dean's feet to the fire. And now saying, look, this is not about corporate contributions tied to nothing. This is about corporate contributions tied to a vision. And I think that a number of the business leaders in the, one of the things that's been very gratifying about being here is how many business people are here, how many business people have been supporting our AACTE P21 project. There is corporate interest in this issue to be had if we create a compelling vision, and if people realize that the business community will be absolutely serious about holding the colleges of education feet to the fire to make those plans happen if they want continued investment. And that's a strategy, last comment, that we can also take to the foundation community. The foundation community should be tying its investments in colleges of education, and there are obviously a couple of large foundations that are now making investments in education. But they don't have a blueprint for a 21st century college of education or a blueprint for a globally competitive college of education. So I think that, I don't know where we're going to be in 6 or 12 months, but my hope to all of us is that we can actually create the beginning of such a blueprint, or the beginning of such a vision that the business community would be inclined to support.
So this is Dick, whose feet you wish to be held to the fire.
Thank you. I represent that part of that education to whom the horse and buggy is a screamingly fast mode of transportation, and the Clay tablet and the stylus is the way to go for writing.